Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today. We're going to wait another minute or two to let the rest of our attendees get started, and then we can begin today's webinar. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I am Allison Cook, a Marketing Campaign Manager at Carbonite, and I want to welcome you to the TCO of Veeam Backup, Understanding the True Cost of Virtual Machine Backup. Just a little bit of housekeeping. The webinar today is being recorded, and you're going to receive a follow-up email with all the slides in the next day or two. And if you have any questions throughout this webinar, you can submit them at any time by typing in your question into the questions pane in the panel. We're going to have a Q&A at the end of the presentation, but just so you know, if your question isn't answered during this presentation, you will definitely receive an answer in a follow-up email. But without further ado, I would like to introduce you to today's presenters. We have Edwin Ewan. He's a senior analyst at Enterprise Strategy Group, and we have Jamie Zajac. She is a senior director of product management here at Carbonite. So Jamie, Edwin, you can take it away.
So, hi, my name is Edwin Ewan, and as was brought up, I am a senior analyst at Enterprise Strategy Group, and I cover IT systems management. That includes traditional on-premise solutions and cloud solutions, and I've been a product manager and at companies such as Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and Microsoft. And Jamie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. So Jamie Zajac here. I've been working at Carbonite. I run our Veeam backup product line as well as our endpoint and a few other product lines here. And my focus is really on designing and implementing high availability and disaster recovery solutions. That's been my history. And coming to Carbonite, I work to make those solutions available to mid-market businesses. So looking forward to giving you an overview today of our Veeam backup solution and hopefully see how it can fit into your business budget and requirements. And I'll let Edwin take it away with the beginning portion of the slides.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jamie. So as we go forward, we're going to go take a look at today's agenda. And again, both myself and Jamie will be presenting. What I'll present is really a discussion about what the Veeam backup market landscape was, what's the history behind it. And then we're going to have some ESG research about what are the challenges that today's data protection professionals are facing, especially when it comes to virtual machines, but also in the broader context of the increased demands that are placed upon those that are protecting our data. Then Jamie will go ahead and talk about Carbonite's Veeam backup solution, some pricing comparisons, and the availability and versus build your own. So why don't we go ahead and we'll get started. And what we'll see in the first slide is really what's the state of the Veeam backup market. And if we go all the way back to when we first started having virtual machines, and I was actually there, I was part of some of the teams that helped create some application virtualization, virtual server. I was there when we launched Hyper-V at Microsoft and worked on with VMware. Early software in terms of backup really treated VMs like physical machines. So what we said was, well, virtual machines, we can access them, we see them like regular physical machines, let's just go ahead and back them up as virtual machines. And what we found was those solutions were really less than ideals, especially for small and medium businesses. They really didn't understand some of the nuances with it. Often if you went ahead and backed up the host itself, we weren't backing up what side it's inside the host machine. If we backed, the guest itself, if we backed the VM guest, then we weren't getting the VM itself, so we were protecting the data. But if we lost the host machine, we'd have to completely rebuild the virtual machine from scratch. If we did both at the same time, we'd end up with double backups. It would take a lot longer. There'd be keying issues. So what we did was we ended up really working hard to develop virtual specific backup solutions from companies like Veeam and others, while traditional backup solutions also kind of stepped up and created virtual backup solutions. So the market really did split between those traditional vendors that added VM capability, often parallel to their existing traditional physical backup capabilities, and then new VM-specific backup vendors. But what we've gotten into the existing markets is that virtual machines and virtualization is really kind of ingrained to the operational system that we have in IT today. It's really not an outlier. And in fact, if we really look at it, we're now being faced with other solutions, from cloud to containers to native applications and mobile applications, desktops used in a different way. There are all these other things out there, and we're seeing greater fragmentation in the market. We're seeing greater complication in the market. And what we're seeing great demand for those that are kind of looking for a single solution to protect both physical and virtual servers. They're really looking for one solution that can back up at that infrastructure level and then also potentially extend into some of these newer technologies or allow those things to run. So if we go ahead and take a look at our first data point, which is the next slide, one of the things that we're going to be asking about is really about the complexity of IT today. So why don't we move to the next slide, sorry. And well, why don't I go ahead and talk about it? What we found when we asked a question within our IT spending intention survey, which is an annual survey done every year at ESG, Enterprise Strategy Group, we ask our broader audience about what the state or the capabilities of the environments are. And one of the questions we asked was, how complex is your IT environment? Because I think there was an expectation a couple of years ago that with the rise of cloud, where we're getting some automation, where we're getting supposedly these new capabilities that allow us to do more application level and kind of reduce the menial day-to-day tasks, that our IT environments should have become a lot easier to manage. And what we found was, when we asked, compared to 2 years ago, how complex is your IT environment? What we found was that 68% of our respondents said that their environments were in fact more complex than they were 2 years ago. Only 5% said it was less complex than it was 2 years ago. And really 1 in 5, 21% said things are significantly more complex than they were 2 years ago. And that really is counterintuitive to what we had originally expected. So we decided to dig deep into that. So if we look at the next slide, which is our next data point, we asked, what's driving this IT complexity? We really wanted to understand what is really driving these issues. And if we look at the top 4 or 5 answers, it really kind of presents the challenges that we see in the data protection market. We see number 1 is higher data volumes. There's just more data that needs to be managed, and that's managed in terms of just managing the infrastructure for the data, presenting that data, backing up that data, but just controlling and understanding that data. Then the next one is the increase in the number of type of endpoint devices, increase in the number of type of applications used by employees, both of which then drive more data. And then the need to use both on-premises data centers and public cloud providers, as well as more users. But what we're seeing is we're just seeing an explosion in how people are using IT and the requirements and the needs. We're getting new types of users and more users, new types of endpoints and more endpoints. That drives the back-end data volumes, and they're going to want that data in different formats, in different areas. That's really going to challenge data protection professionals. So as we move to our next slide, which is our next data point, we take a look at what are the current data protection challenges. So we really specifically asked, what are the issues that you're looking for? And we see 2 color bars here. The yellow color bars is when we ask them, what's the primary data protection challenges? Pick your top 3. And the dark blue is when we ask them to accept all of them. What are all the ones that are bothering you? What are all the ones that are factors? So if we look at the top factors overall, we're looking at cost being number 1. It's still a very, very significant impact. how can we optimize what is the economics behind the work that we're doing. Now, it doesn't mean that we only think about costs, but when we think about how we protect, we need to understand that we can't overspend on it. The efficiency has become very important, especially in today's cloud-based environments. And then behind that is protection of virtual machines, containers, those things hosted on public cloud infrastructures and honestly on your local infrastructure. And then the fourth one is data protection of virtual environments. And as you can see, even if we take a look at the top 3 responses, those requirements are still at the top of those areas. So there had often been discussions that people felt that, well, things are fairly well protected and we don't have to think about data protection, especially about virtual machines that, we've been doing virtual machines for 10 plus years now. I'm sure we've got the data protection solved for virtual machines. In fact, we really have not. The challenges still remain, and more importantly, the scope is driving complexity that we need to go ahead and resolve. And as we go to our final data point, which is our the final slide that I'll be talking to today, the other thing that we need to factor in is what is the impact of downtime for businesses? And 2 things have changed pretty significantly for most of our businesses, most of the people that we support through our IT and our data protection. First of all is that we no longer support really primarily just an audience that are internal users. We're either supporting external users directly, or the direct functions and the applications and services that we're protecting are affecting the direct end users. They're really affecting the people that are using the systems every single day, and that potentially has a really strong business impact. The other factor is the issue of what the expectations are of users today. As I've often said in our research and our presentations, the iPhone generation that we talked about 10 years ago is the office worker and consumer of today. And they have come to expect an always-on environment, really a zero downtime environment. And they don't take interruptions in terms of services or data loss very lightly. Gone are the days where an office worker would simply say, well, the systems are down, I'll go grab a cup of coffee, I'll go to the next cube and talk to Bob and see how he's doing. I'm sure it'll be up in 5 or 10 minutes. They're making immediate concerns about it, and the impacts are growing. So what we asked in here were the downtime impacts for your business due to downtime or data loss. And in the dark blue are those that are all potential impacts, but yellows are the ones that are the most concerning. And overall, what we see is loss in customer confidence, a direct feeling that customers sit there and say, well, if that site goes down or that business is not available when I need to go into it, I'm concerned about them overall. I'm sure many of us have felt the same way if we go to a bank and the banking system is down, not for a planned downtime or things like that. The second one, and the one that actually is the most concerning if we picked an individual one, is direct loss of revenue. Really a direct impact to the business today when you have downtime. So data protection is not more than just keeping the lights on, so to speak. It has a direct impact on business today. And then we talk about lost business opportunities and damage to brand integrity. So we're really talking more than the traditional feeling of inconvenience or that we're upsetting users, but in the end, we'll recover from and we'll just apologize. IT is now being held to a much higher standard, and today's demands for the always-on zero downtime business really impact end users and drive the need to have really an efficient, cost-effective way to manage virtual machines. So you really need to reduce the complexity, reduce the cost, streamline things, and make sure that you cover all the bases, and that's really what businesses are looking for. And Jamie, I'll let you go ahead and continue.
Yeah, thank you so much, Edwin, for that analysis. It's a lot of good data points. As you discuss the trends in the industry, there's a lot of overlap with how Carbonite looks at the market. When we look, we're trying to see what problems people have and how we can develop solutions, to those data protection problems. And so we find a lot of similar information. IT, as you said, is getting more and more complex. It's not simplifying, it's getting harder to manage and harder to understand. And as you said, businesses are relying on IT infrastructure more and more. And so not only does this drive up the expectation of having an always-on business, but it also drives up the cost of having downtime. And so you can actually, now understand and quantify, depending on the size of your business, how much does having downtime really impact you and really affect you. And these are kind of hard costs. There's a lot of soft costs that you could bake in as well, like you said, as far as loss of confidence and loss of future customers and bad reputation and such. So, downtime used to be something that only very large enterprises focused on, but now in this digital world, it becomes a much bigger and bigger issue for all businesses to deal with. So there's more e-commerce infrastructure, more technology-driven applications, more collaboration between employees across sites. So data protection, disaster recovery, backup and recovery applications, these are the services that help you minimize that help you protect against those issues. And so this is really where Carbonite focuses, is we're offering a breadth of solutions across this entire spectrum of high availability, disaster recovery, backup and restore solutions. So today we're going to focus a lot on the Carbonite Veeam backup solution because virtualization, is a key backbone of IT infrastructure. So most people are already using some sort of solution for doing backups of their VMs. As you mentioned, virtualization is not a new technology, it's a backbone and a key part. And there are certainly people out there that are perfectly happy with what they have, right? They have a backup solution in place, it meets their budget, it scales with their needs, it just hums along, no problems. For those of you joining this webinar today, I would argue you probably have at least one of those issues, budget, scalability, robustness, reliability, and such. Okay, so on the next slide, we're going to jump straight to the punchline of this. You're probably paying too much for however you're doing your VM backup. All right, now that's the tagline that kind of got you here today and said, hey, if I can save a bunch of money on my backup solution, and cut that budget line, I have a dozen other projects that I'd like to be doing. And if I can put more money into that, that's where I want to spend my time and money. So to help you understand, really how much are you paying for VM backup, we've broken this down into a couple of categories. Okay? So first is licensing costs and support. So depending on what vendor you're using, well, depending on what the licensing model and what the ultimate, costs and dollars are that you're spending. There are many solutions out there with many different business models. So some of the most popular solutions include upfront capital expenditure purchases. So for example, what I mean by that is buying a license and then paying an annual maintenance for updates and support updates. So in a world of evolving security requirements, paying for support and maintenance isn't really optional anymore, right? You can't not update the security modules on your software for 3 years and pass an audit or have a good security posture, right? And as when referenced earlier, being compliant and proving audit compliance is a key problem that a lot of people have. So it's very important. So depending on which vendor you're working with and how they structure, you may have additional costs for support, right? So maybe you have to pay a higher percentage to get 24/7 support, or maybe you have to pay to a higher tier just to get a human to pick up the phone when you call. So I always look at this as when you're dealing with a restore, in a stressful, business critical situation, and you need some help. You have a question, you just don't get it, or there's a problem that's showing up. You don't want to be held hostage with someone saying, hey, I'm sorry, you bought the bronze plan, and so I can't answer the phone right now unless you pay me more money. So I think about a retailer this time of year, right? I don't want to be the IT person dealing with an outage at a retailer during the holiday season, and I'm not able to get a support rep on the phone to help me resolve an issue quickly, right? That's a really bad position to be in. And so when you look at the cost, you're paying for licensing, you're paying for support. If you're not paying for support, then you're probably going to pay in the future in a rough situation. So then we have hardware and storage costs. So when you're building out a backup environment, you have to have all of the right hardware in the right place, right? How big does your backup server need to be? How much storage? What happens when you need more storage? You have to pay for all of these things. This costs real money. Again, typically you're looking at a capital expenditure or an upfront purchase to grow your backup environment. So where this gets tricky is especially if things grow faster than expected. As Edwin mentioned, is one of the biggest challenges that businesses have, and that directly relates to a challenge in your backup environment. How easily does it scale? So not only do you need the technical capability of a product that can scale as your infrastructure grows, but you also need to be able to add more storage without having to incur large capital expenditure purchases. And finally, I think most people have heard of the 3-2-1 backup strategy by now, right? You want 3 copies of your data on 2 different storage types, and you need 1 copy at least offsite. So the offsite copy is one that many people are just recently looking to add. So with many cloud and offsite options, you want to choose one that meets your requirement and is cost effective. Okay. This may be a solution from the same vendor. This may be from a different vendor. It may mean that you have additional licensing or support costs that you need to consider with an offsite copy. Okay. So how do you actually, the other thing you have to ask yourself is how do you actually manage and get the data offsite? Okay. So depending on the software that you're using, this may be baked into the software, or this may be additional capabilities that you have to build or configure in order to get it offsite. And you might have additional licensing costs as well. So if you're using software that requires, source side licensing, but also requires target side licensing, then you may have to pay double. Okay. The other part of considering when you have an offsite license is how you're going to deal with annual restore tests and audit compliance. The more infrastructure that you have in place, the more your management cost goes up. You have more servers to patch, more servers to manage, to deal with credentials on. You have a lot of different aspects that you must consider. And for each one of these items, you need people to manage it. People to analyze and make purchasing decisions, people to learn the technology, people to monitor it, people to troubleshoot the software, to create and document processes, and people to ensure the compliance of the software. So there are hard and there are soft costs here. Depending on the complexity or the growing complexity of your infrastructure will depend on how much time people spend managing the solution. Additionally, the time that you spend managing your backup solution is time that you're not spending on another project, right? Maybe you want to upgrade your network, modernize an application, automate your patching of a system, or improve security in another area of your business. There are enough IT projects to go around that you don't want to be spending your time managing your backup solution or your backup vendors any more than you have to. So how does Carbonite do all of this? Well, on the next slide, it'll actually show you an overview of what Carbonite Server offers. So Carbonite Server is Carbonite's platform for all of server backup solutions. This covers physical servers, legacy systems such as IBM or AIX systems, as well as agentless VM backup for VMware and Hyper-V. So our solution is designed to give you the agentless backup. So it's really simple to install, manage, and get started with creating backup jobs, but also giving you flexible restore options. So we have about 7 different ways that you can restore your data that range from doing an instant boot of a VM, so recovering the data in 1 or 2 minutes, doing granular restores. We can recover a specific file, folder, Exchange database or email of an Exchange database, SQL Server, granular restores of application data. So this gives you the flexibility so that no matter what happens when you need to do a recovery, you have the tools at your fingertips to execute that. So with our solution, you can have RPOs and RTOs that are in the minutes. So we can do RPOs, recovery points, as frequently as every 15 minutes. And we can offer recovery times in as little as 2 minutes. So we're able to boot the data immediately off our backup server, which gives you very, very fast recovery and access to your data. So again, when we're talking about downtime being costly and the importance of getting your systems back up and running, being able to recover in 2 minutes time, that's barely enough time for someone to go get that cup of coffee that Edwin said people might do if you have downtime. So Carbonite Server is remotely managed. So for you as an IT administrator, whether you have one office and everybody is co-located, or whether you're dealing with remote offices and remote infrastructure, you can manage everything through one single centralized dashboard. So this gives you web access, whether you're managing it from your phone remotely while you're on vacation, or whether you're sitting in the office and managing 4 or 5 or many remote sites from a single dashboard. One of the big things is how you're going to scale your solution. So our technology includes a scale out, so you can horizontally scale out your storage requirements. So you can add NAS, SAN, or direct attached storage to the backup server itself. And this allows you to span multiple volumes, even with different technologies, so that as your data footprint grows, again, one of the top challenges that businesses are facing, you can easily scale out your backup infrastructure as well to meet that requirement. And then all of the data, everything that Carbonite does, it's always encrypted. There's no option to back up your data without encryption. We offer different encryption techniques and different key management options, but the data is always encrypted, whether it's sitting at rest on your local backup server, whether it's sitting at rest in the cloud, or while it's in transit between any of those points. So on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about how this actually works. So we'll dig a little bit into the technology. So the Carbonite Server backup solution is a hybrid solution. So within your infrastructure, you'd install a backup server. This can be a physical or virtual machine, and it can run on Windows or Linux. You install the Carbonite software there. You enter your host or hypervisor information, or vCenter, for example. It'll go out, it'll query and do a full discovery of the environment. So it'll give you a nice list of all the VMs that it found. You'll create your job. Each job has one-to-many VMs included in it. And you can create a job either based on individual VM selections, or you could choose a vSphere tag, folder, resource pool, or even a host. What this allows you to do is create a job, let's say based on a vSphere tag, and then anytime you tag a new VM with that tag in vSphere, it'll automatically be included in the backup job. So this way, as you add more VMs, you don't need to go and add them manually to the backup. So this gives you a little bit more confidence that the VMs that you want to protect are actually protected, because you don't have to select them twice, right? Anytime you have to do the same action twice, it leads to not only inefficiency, but it leads to human errors and mistakes. Things get missed. Okay, so once the data is backed up on the backup server, this is where we make it available for restore. So from the backup server, you can instantly boot the VM. If the backup server is running on Windows, then we would boot to Hyper-V. If it's running on Linux, we'd boot to KVM. And in either instance, we can actually expose our storage repository as an NFS share. This allows you to attach it into VMware and use the VMware hypervisor while using our storage repository as the data store location, and boot the VM. So you can get it up and running in 2 minutes, because we're not actually moving the data to the host. So you have very, very fast recovery and access to your data, while you're still able to manage it through VMware or Hyper-V or whichever virtualization technology you're choosing to use. So once we store it on the backup server, we'll also replicate it offsite. So the offsite can either be your secondary data center, or the most common choice is using Carbonite Cloud as the offsite. In this case, you don't have to manage or install any external infrastructure. You'll simply replicate to the Carbonite Cloud, and all your data is also available there. So you can do any of the restores either on the backup server or on the offsite server as well. So if you want to have really fast boot cloud failover to the Carbonite Cloud, we can offer this for you. If you want to boot on the backup server, we can offer this for you. And if you want to do granular recoveries from either environment, this is allowed as well. So again, what we focused on doing is giving you the different technology and capabilities that you need to restore the data, no matter where you have it stored, no matter how it's formatted, and make it available no matter what the need is. So one thing I did mention is that we can actually, because we're running Hyper-V on the Windows backup server or KVM on the Linux backup server, we actually have built the technology to do a cross-hypervisor restore. So what we do in this sense is, even if you're backing up from VMware, we can restore it into a Hyper-V environment and vice versa. So if your DR environment is different from your primary data center environment, perhaps due to licensing costs or such, there's no problem, because you can do the cross-hypervisor restore. We take care of the technology to transform the data between those required formats so that you can still boot the data. Okay, so you can see that our VM backup solution, gives you all the backup and fast restore capabilities that you need. And because we can also scale out horizontally on the backup server, giving you more space without having to move data or restart backups over again, we can scale from small businesses, really simple, easy to use and adopt technology, all the way up to small enterprises that have more complex environments, multi-host environments, remote offices, and need a centralized dashboard. Okay, so let's get to pricing on the next slide. So I've picked a common VM backup provider here, Veeam. I've listed out the costs associated with running Veeam. So first, Veeam primarily sells through a perpetual license. So that means that you're paying a high upfront cost for each socket on your hypervisor. So you have to license all of the sockets. So if you have a mixed dev test environment, or you have some VMs that don't actually need to be backed up and don't need protection, you're going to have to pay for all of the sockets on that host. So if you're expanding your VM infrastructure, maybe you buy a few new hosts, you're going to have to license all the sockets on those, even if your host is only partially used when you first implement it. Right, so this drives costs, and since the cost per socket of the perpetual license can be thousands of dollars, it's a really big upfront cost that you have to consider, right? That's a lot of cash that you're putting out just to get that license in place. So Veeam does require that some of the software be run on a Windows host. So that means that you are going to need to have a Windows license associated with the technology as well. So again, that's another cost you have to consider. You also need to provide your local backup and the storage repository where that data is going to live. So this is where it starts to get a bit complicated. You need to estimate your storage, your throughput, your disk I/O, your CPU requirements, and everything else. And you're responsible for sizing this, or maybe paying a consultant to help you size it. If you get it wrong and you need to change it, you need to do the sizing and you need to purchase the hardware to accommodate. Now, this gives you flexibility, but with flexibility comes two things. First, it's the time required to come up with an environment sizing. Second is the responsibility for anything that changes or goes wrong, right? If you don't configure your storage properly, that's on you to spend time, and time's money, to resolve that issue. So this means that you have to invest the time to get it sized right, and if anything goes wrong, you have to invest the time to fix it. And finally is the offsite cost. Veeam offers several options. So you can host your own offsite copy, you can use a Cloud Connect partner, or you can use a public cloud. All of these come with their own costs and challenges. So when you're hosting the offsite in your own private cloud or your own secondary data center, you're responsible for licensing and for the hardware. So again, you have to do the sizing, purchase the equipment, maintain the equipment, troubleshoot any issues, and scale that as your environment grows. So that means that your storage requirements, and again, Edwin mentioned that storage requirements are a big challenge for most businesses. You have to do double the work, and you have to size your local backup and your offsite copy. You have to do double the licensing to get the appropriate licensing on each side for your primary and secondary. So when you use a Cloud Connect partner, you're not required to size, scale, and purchase, or even manage the offsite copy. So in exchange for that, the offsite copy requires you to sign a separate agreement with that Cloud Connect partner. So you'll have to negotiate with them separately, do security audits separately with their infrastructure, understand the implications of doing that and how it impacts your business. So this makes more work for you. And again, more work equals more money. And the third option is to use public cloud. So Veeam can replicate to a cloud as your offsite copy. So when using public cloud, you're still responsible for any Veeam licenses that you need to run that workload in the cloud. You're responsible for knowing the limitations of the backup types that you choose, which ones can be restored to which cloud and in which way. You're responsible for the costs, so whether that includes any the storage, any compute, the transaction costs on the read and the write to the storage, and any egress costs when you're reading the data or doing restores. So your support is also fractured, with infrastructure support being provided by the public cloud provider, at a cost, and the software support being provided by Veeam or maybe a partner. So this gives you a few different people to work with when you have an issue. So there are costs here as well. So how does Carbonite do it? How do we reduce the costs? Well, we'll show you on the next slide. So Carbonite has wrapped the entire solution into two simple options for you. First is the Carbonite Cloud solution. We offer a subscription model. You can choose monthly or annual billing based on the amount of data that you're paying for. So rather than paying per socket for every socket on the host, you pay for what data you actually select for backup. So if you have 100 VMs and you only need to protect 25 of them, then only select, and thus pay for those 25 VMs. As more VMs require protection, you just include them in your backup job and they'll be included on the next bill. So you can choose whether you want a price lock-in for 1 year or 3-year terms, and again, choose whether you want billed monthly or annually to best meet your cash flow requirements. You can also choose which retention option you want. So we offer a 1-year retention scheme, so we'll keep all of the data backups that you need for 1 year, or we choose a 7-year retention. And we do offer custom retention purchases if you need something else besides one of those standard options. So that's it. Your backup server licensing, all your offsite licensing, everything's included. So we did talk a little bit about how you size your infrastructure. And we do have another choice on the next slide here that shows you how we help with the backup server infrastructure sizing. So to help you get out of the business of sizing that backup infrastructure, we offer a subscription that includes the physical hardware for the backup server, as well as the software licensing and the offsite copy and storage. So in this model, we ship qualified hardware that we've certified to run with our software to you, and we embed it into the monthly or annual subscription bill that you have. So this way, we help you choose the right hardware profile. We make sure you have enough storage to match your footprint and retention, enough CPU and memory to provide fast backups and instant recoveries, and no additional licensing costs. That means you know you have the right hardware. Additionally, Carbonite will even help you set it up and get all of your jobs configured. So this allows a Carbonite professional services engineer to work with you directly, and he'll do that remotely to make sure that you have the right jobs set up, the right parallelism set up, the right retention configured, the right everything to make it work and keep you protected. So we'll even do a backup and a restore with you to make sure that you're confident in how everything works. And then we always end all of our professional services engagement with a knowledge sharing. So not only do you have the confidence that a professional set it up, but you also know and understand how it works and where you need to look to see what's going on and what alerts and monitoring you can do. So this way your team becomes experts on the software as well. So the really cool thing about this model, and we call it hardware as a service, is that there's no upfront cost. And if you outgrow the box, we just work with you to get a new one. Again, no upfront cost required for that. So this reduces the stress of you needing to micromanage your backup environment to avoid a huge cost if your storage grows, or if your recovery environment or CPU or memory configurations grow. Okay. So the appliance is automatically selected based on the size that you use and shipped to you so that you can configure, get that set up, and do everything you need. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. So the whole punchline here and point of the webinar was, you're paying too much for your backup solution. So how do we know that you're paying too much? Well, unless you have a single fee for software, hardware, and offsite copy, a single support team, a single solution for everything, then you're probably paying too much. This is how Carbonite helps you lower the total cost of ownership. We give you one support team, we give you one solution, one product to buy for everything that you need. Now, Carbonite offers more, as you'll see on the next slide, than just VM backup. So I do want to spend a few minutes here to walk you through the different other solutions that Carbonite offers so that you can see, if you have a mixed environment of VMs, physical servers, endpoints, that Carbonite can meet and fulfill the full spectrum of data protection requirements that you have. So first is Carbonite Endpoint. So a lot of people actually know Carbonite for their endpoint solution that started years ago. Carbonite Endpoint is an enterprise-grade endpoint backup solution for Mac, Windows, laptops, desktops, even includes iOS and Android devices. This can back up to your own data center or to the Carbonite cloud, and it gives you reliable, continuous protection for all of your endpoint devices. You can even have advanced features like an e-discovery interface, a legal hold for your endpoint data and search capability, a remote wipe so that if any device is left behind in a taxi or on an airplane, you can securely wipe all of that data. So Carbonite Server, we talked a lot about the VM edition of it, but we do also have an agent-based solution, which will give you protection for any other servers that you have, whether it's a physical server, whether you're running it in a guest on a VM, maybe for an RDM disk, or something that you need an agent-based solution for, or whether you have a legacy system, like an IBM iSeries, an AIX, or a Solaris box that you need protection. Carbonite Server gives you all of the server-based solution, again, leveraging that hardware as a service model, or leveraging the ability to back up directly to a cloud for all of the servers in your environment. Carbonite Recover is what gives you the ability to fail over and actually run your server workloads within the Carbonite cloud. So if you want true DR protection, always the ability to spin up a server in a matter of minutes, whether it's on your local backup server or in the Carbonite cloud, Carbonite Recover gives you the secure disaster recovery capability within the Carbonite cloud, so you're never without your infrastructure. Carbonite Availability is another flavor that allows you to actually do a real-time replication, so a byte-level real-time replication of any server, physical or virtual, from one host to another host, or from one physical server to another. And Carbonite Availability means that at any point in time, whether you're hosting your own primary and secondary data center, or whether you're using the Carbonite Recover version to host this within the Carbonite cloud, you can always have near zero downtime for your business critical applications. And then the final solution is Carbonite Migrate. One of the biggest trends that we've seen from customers, not only as far as explosive data growth, is the ability or the requirement to change the infrastructure underlying an application. So Carbonite Migrate gives you a non-disruptive byte-level replication to help you move and migrate systems from anywhere to anywhere. So Carbonite Migrate allows you to work from physical to virtual, virtual to physical, on-prem to public cloud, between two clouds, such as moving from AWS to Azure, or even from a public cloud back to an on-prem data center. So very flexible system, but it helps you do a migration from anywhere to anywhere. And it does this in real time, in a non-disruptive way, while keeping your applications totally in sync across the original and the target location. So again, no matter what your data protection need is, whether you're looking at legacy systems, whether you're looking at virtual systems, endpoints, business critical applications, on-prem or cloud hosted, Carbonite has a breadth of data protection solutions that can meet those requirements. We spent a lot of time today on how you're paying too much for VM backup and how Carbonite has a solution that can help you reduce your total cost of ownership for VM backup. But no matter what the need is, we have something that can help you get you covered. Okay, so at this time, I'm going to turn it back over to Allison, and I think we're going to see if there were any questions given throughout the presentation, and we'll get you answers for those.
Thank you, both Jamie and Edwin. So yeah, we got a lot of questions, so we're going to begin our session now. If you do still have any questions, please feel free to submit them through the panel. We got two people asking, how is Carbonite priced? Is it per protected or stored terabyte?
Yes, that's a good question. Carbonite is always priced based on the protected terabytes. And so what this means is that you're actually in control by how much data you have. This is what you're going to pay for. Carbonite handles how well the data compresses, how well it dedupes. All of those factors are not things that you have to worry about as far as computing your initial price and your ongoing price of data, always based on protected terabyte.
Okay. And does Carbonite offer a failover option in case my environment goes down?
Yes, so there's actually two ways you can recover the entire environment. So first is you can boot up directly on the backup server itself. And so if you're, maybe just one VM got lost or corrupted, or you're having some issues with your storage on the vSphere environment, you could boot up directly on the backup server. In the case of a complete DR environment, like perhaps a complete network outage to your office or a flood, we do offer through Carbonite Recover, you can have the ability to fail over completely into the Carbonite cloud. So this allows for multi-tier applications. So if you have web servers and databases, you can construct the network infrastructure to meet the requirements and actually use the Carbonite cloud to completely run your infrastructure while you rebuild the original source side systems.
All right. The next question is, can Carbonite VM backup protect RDM disks?
My favorite question. So Carbonite VM backup cannot protect PRDM disks. We can protect VRDM disks, but this is where the agent-based solution would come in. So because Carbonite Server has both a VM edition and a regular server edition, the server edition itself has an agent that can be installed in the guest. And so when you install that inside the guest, you're able to select and therefore protect any of the disks that are available. Whereas the agentless solution would only protect the VRDM disks specifically.
All right. And then does Carbonite require a separate backup to do the granular recovery as opposed to whole VM recovery? And if it does, do I have to pay double for this?
So if you're trying to do a full system recovery as well as a granular file level recovery, you only have to do one backup. So we back up the VMs once, and then we essentially are looking at the VM itself. We do a virtual mount using our software, and then we're able to drill down into our storage repository to find the granular file or granular application level elements that you want to select for restore. So this way, it's one backup copy stored locally, one backup copy transferred over the network, one backup copy stored remotely, but all of the restore options are available off that single backup copy.
Perfect. And all right, so there are a couple more questions that we weren't able to get to. However, we will definitely get you an answer via email follow-up in the next day or two. But for everybody else, we are out of time. So on behalf of Jamie and Edwin, we'd like to say thank you all again for joining in and participating in today's webinar. And we hope you have a great rest of your day. And thank you, everybody.